The roof of our office building is my secret hideaway. Here, where the noise of the city fades to a barely perceptible hum, I've found my ritual: a cup of hot coffee, a sky painted by the setting sun, and a few precious minutes of solitude. Today, I brought along a slice of carrot cake, a treat one of my colleagues had brought to celebrate their birthday. To my surprise, it was delicious. I'd already eaten half when, tired of the endless stream of notifications, I decided to play some music through the speaker. But instead of music, I heard Daniel's voice. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. It seemed my phone had accidentally connected to the speaker, and I had tapped into his conversation. It was a strange feeling, like opening someone else's letter without permission. "We're just two people living together." His voice was calm, almost weary. "I don't know if I love her or if I'm just used to her." Another voice, likely his brother's, responded with a softer tone. "You need to figure that out, for her sake and yours." I froze. Daniel's voice continued, but the meaning of his words slipped away from me. My mind was stuck on one phrase: "I don't know if I love her." The speaker went silent as I hastily disconnected it. My hands trembled, but I fought to keep my emotions in check. Under the pink-tinged sky, on this rooftop, I suddenly realized that the relationship I had believed to be solid was now on shaky ground. There were no tears, no hysteria, just a strange, heavy emptiness. I finished my coffee, feeling the cold wind gently brush my face. The sunset continued its grand ceremony over the city, as though nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had turned upside down. I watched as the sun slowly dipped below the horizon and asked myself only one question: when did I stop noticing that something between us was slipping away? A few days after that conversation, I felt like I was moving through a fog. Daniel and I lived in the same apartment, yet it was as if we were on different planets. I kept silent about what I had overheard, and he either didn't notice my detachment or pretended not to. My friend Stella, noticing my state, announced, "You're going out tonight, end of discussion." She dragged me to a concert of some indie band I'd never heard of. Loud music, a club with concrete walls and dim lighting, all of it only emphasized how much I didn't want to be there. But something inside whispered, "Stay. Maybe you'll find something important here." And I did. Amid the crowd, surrounded by friends, holding a glass of gin and tonic, stood Noel. His face immediately triggered a flood of memories, of university days, of nights spent working on projects until dawn, of his contagious laughter. He noticed me at the same moment I noticed him. "Ellie?" He set down his glass and stepped closer, smiling as if he'd just found a long-lost friend he'd been searching for years. "Is that you? I never thought you'd have this kind of taste in music." "Hi, Noel," I replied, smiling even though something deep inside stirred, as if someone had plucked long-forgotten strings. "I didn't think I'd see you here either." "Seems there's a lot I didn't know about you," he teased, motioning toward the terrace. We ended up talking all evening. The conversation was easy, warm, almost weightless. We reminisced about university and shared how our lives had changed since. He told me about his travels through South America. I shared funny stories from my PR job. He listened with genuine interest, and it felt remarkable. When I spoke about my dreams, he nodded, as if he could still see the old Ellie I once was. In that moment, I realized how long it had been since I'd felt truly heard. The club behind us pulsed faintly with bass, the cold night air biting to the bone, but I didn't want to leave. His voice warmed me, like a blanket on a winter evening. When we said goodbye, he held my hand just a moment longer than necessary. "I'm glad we ran into each other," he said before disappearing into the noisy crowd. I went home with my head buzzing and a strange feeling inside, like an old memory had become brighter than the reality I was living in. A few weeks passed, but that evening with Noel lingered in my memory as something special. Every time my thoughts drifted back to him, I found myself asking, why? Why did it feel so important? I couldn't find an answer. Life went on with its familiar routines, yet something had changed. A vague restlessness settled inside me, as though I stood on the threshold of something new but was too afraid to step forward. One weekend, I decided to visit a city festival in the park. My main goal was a free cup of coffee being handed out at the entrance, but there was so much happening. Street musicians, vibrant stalls, a lottery promising sudden happiness. My attention was drawn to a sand sculpture workshop. A small crowd had gathered around an improvised stage, where someone was enthusiastically explaining how to sculpt with sand. I looked closer. It was Noel. He stood at the center, surrounded by children and adults, his hands covered in sand, smiling as if there was nothing better in life. It seemed like his energy filled the entire space around him. I couldn't help but step closer. "See, this is how you shape the foundation," he explained, lifting a small dolphin figurine. "And the most important thing, don't be afraid to experiment. Sand forgives mistakes." Suddenly, he noticed me, and his face lit up with a smile. "Ellie, you came." "By accident," I said with a shy shrug, feeling the other participants' attention shift toward me. After the event, he approached me, drying his hands with a towel. In his hands was a small sand figurine of a cat, which he handed to me with a playful bow. "This is you, small, but ready to pounce." I laughed, but something clicked inside me. His lightness, his energy, it was so different from the familiar seriousness of Daniel. Yet I tried to resist those feelings. We strolled through the park, chatting about trivial things until we reached the lottery booth. I pulled a ticket as a joke, but Noel, with a mock-serious expression, said, "Sometimes fate hides in the most random places." My ticket didn't win anything, but his words lingered in my mind. As I walked home, clutching the sandcat figurine, I couldn't shake the feeling that he understood me more deeply than I was ready to admit. Saturday was overcast and lazy. Daniel, noticing my car had been overdue for some maintenance, insisted we go together to get the oil changed and the car washed. It was one of those rare occasions when we spent time together outside the house. But instead of bringing us closer, the tension between us was almost palpable. We pulled into the car wash, and I exhaled, letting myself relax as streams of soapy water turned the car windows into abstract paintings. When the system abruptly stopped mid-cycle, it seemed amusing at first, but after a few minutes it became clear the problem was more serious. Something had jammed, and we were trapped inside, surrounded by streaks of soap. "Well, of course," Daniel muttered, leaning his head back against the headrest. "Even the car wash can't go right." I looked at him, feeling a strange mix of emotions. There was no anger in his voice, only exhaustion. My usual irritation melted away. "It's just the system malfunctioning," I said, trying to sound calm. He turned to me sharply. "Do you really think it's just the system? Lately it feels like everything's breaking, not just the car. We don't even talk to each other properly anymore." His words stung, but I knew he was right. "Why does everything have to be so hard with us?" he continued, staring at the streams of soap sliding down the windows. "We can't even get through a car wash without getting stuck." And then we both laughed. It was nervous, awkward laughter that unexpectedly grew louder and more genuine. In that moment, the soapy windows, the gray day, and our trapped car stopped feeling like problems. We laughed until tears began to form in our eyes, but the laughter was deceptive. I felt as if beneath this release lay something much heavier, like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, silently acknowledging that something between us had broken. When the car wash finally resumed and we were released, we drove home in silence. One thought kept circling in my mind. We can laugh, but we've already lost what made us real. We decided to try an escape room. Everything was fairly ordinary until, at one point, we ended up in an old storage room where lanterns and other props for the game were kept. We were searching for the next clue when, suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us, leaving us in darkness. I heard Noel chuckle. "Well, there's our cage," he joked, switching on his flashlight. "Very funny," I replied, but a smile crept onto my face anyway. He illuminated the small space. Dusty shelves, boxes of equipment, the smell of aged wood. The room was cramped and our shoulders nearly touched. His proximity suddenly made me forget that we were just playing a game. "You know?" he said softly, turning toward me. The beam of the flashlight now fell on my hands. "With you, this doesn't just feel like a game. It feels like something more." I looked at him, and our eyes met. His voice, his gaze, the way he looked at me. All of it conveyed emotions he was trying to hide. It was dangerous, but I couldn't look away. "Noel," I whispered, unsure of what I wanted to say. "If I'm wrong, stop me," he said, his voice dropping lower, softer. He leaned in slowly. I didn't stop him, and in the next moment he kissed me. The kiss was warm, tender, and completely unhurried. His hands rested gently on my shoulders, and my fingers, as if moving on their own, found their way to his face. It was a moment that had no past or future, only the here and now. When we finally pulled apart, I realized I was breathing heavily. He was still looking at me, as if waiting for my response. I averted my gaze, trying to gather my thoughts, but inside, everything was in turmoil. "We should get back to the game," I said, my voice weaker than I wanted it to be. "Of course," he replied softly, giving me space. We left the storage room and continued the escape room as if nothing had happened, but everything had changed. I could still feel the warmth of his kiss on my lips, and in my heart there was something new and terrifying. Family dinners at Daniel's parents' house always felt like an obligatory ritual, one I couldn't avoid. They were warm and polite, but steeped in formal tradition. We sat around a long oak table laden with more dishes than even 10 people could eat. I ate mechanically, catching myself barely listening to the conversation. "Daniel, you've been so withdrawn lately," his mother said with a gentle smile as she poured tea. "Is everything all right?" Her words hung in the air, causing everyone at the table to pause. Daniel, who had been indifferently pushing food around on his plate, looked up. His face seemed impassive at first, but then a flicker of irritation crossed it. "Maybe it's because I'm at my limit," he blurted. I glanced at him, startled. No one had expected such a sharp response. His mother frowned slightly but said nothing, instead pretending to focus on her tea. An awkward silence fell over the room, and the conversation shifted to some neutral topic. But I felt it, a crack forming between Daniel and me, growing wider with every passing moment. After dinner, as we were getting ready to leave, he suddenly approached me. His gaze was sharp, almost scorching. "Can you explain to me what's going on?" he asked quietly. "What do you mean?" I feigned ignorance, though I knew exactly what he was asking. "You've changed, Ellie. You disappear in the evenings, you're distant, He sighed, searching for the right words. "It's like you're not really here anymore. Is there something I should know?" His question was insistent, but it carried an undertone of exhaustion. I could see him holding back, trying not to accuse me outright. I stayed silent. The words were stuck somewhere between my throat and my heart. Tell the truth? But what truth? That I didn't know where I stood or what I felt, that I'd met Noel and he had awakened something in me that had been dormant for so long? "Daniel," I began, but the words came out slowly, painfully. "I don't know what to say." "Honesty would be a good place to start," he said, his voice turning icy. I looked away. His disappointment was palpable. He was waiting for an answer, but I couldn't give him one. We drove home in complete silence. The city lights flickered by outside the window, but all I could see was his reflection in the glass. Tense, weary. And I knew we were standing on the edge, where one wrong word could destroy everything. The silence in the apartment had become suffocating. Daniel didn't ask anything more, but his silence spoke louder than any words. I felt like he knew. Maybe not about Noel, but about the invisible yet undeniable chasm that had formed between us. I decided to escape, if only for a few days. Taking a day off, I rented a small cottage by the ocean. The place was as lonely as I felt. sandy dunes, the ceaseless sound of waves, and a night sky blanketed with stars. I hoped that here I might finally hear myself. Each day, I walked along the shore barefoot, feeling the cool sand under my feet. Sometimes I sat on the porch with a notebook, trying to put my thoughts into words, but they refused to form sentences. My emotions were tangled, like knotted threads impossible to unravel. On the third night, I heard the sound of a car on the driveway. My heart stopped, then began pounding faster. But it wasn't Daniel. It was Noel. He stood in front of me, holding a bottle of wine in one hand and the Sandcat figurine in the other. His face reflected a mixture of emotions, joy at seeing me and a worry he wasn't trying to hide. "You found me," I said, more surprised than angry. "I wanted to make sure you were okay," he replied, holding out the figurine. "And honestly, I couldn't sit at home knowing you were out here alone." We sat on the porch and he opened the wine. I told him I had come here to figure things out. He listened without interrupting, as if he knew every word I spoke was vital. "Ellie," he said at last, after we had both fallen silent, staring at the waves, "I want to be with you. I don't know what's going on between you and Daniel, but I know one thing. You deserve more than just being someone's habit." His words cut through the confusion I had been living in for weeks. I looked at him, feeling tears well up, not from sadness, but from clarity. "Noel, I can't just leave him and run to you. That's not a solution. You deserve more than to be part of my mess." My voice trembled, but I said it firmly. He nodded, as though he understood, but I could see he didn't want to give up. "Then tell me what I can do." "Nothing," I replied. "I need to find the answer on my own." We sat in silence, listening to the ocean crashing against the shore. He didn't push or argue. His respect for my decision touched me more deeply than any words could. Later he left, placing the Sandcat on the table. When I returned inside, I felt like I had taken the first step toward something new, toward understanding myself. Returning to the city was both a relief and a challenge. The whole way home, I replayed in my mind what I would say to Daniel. I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The ocean, the night sky, the conversation with Noel, everything had brought things into focus. I finally understood. To find myself, I had to first let go of what I had been clinging to. The next morning, I left Daniel a letter. There were no accusations or demands, only honest words. I wrote that our relationship had become something comfortable but not inspiring, that we were both stuck in a cycle, too afraid to admit we were losing each other, and I added that we needed space to understand what we truly wanted. I didn't expect a response. I went away for a few days to stay with a friend, giving him time to read and process everything. When I returned, his things were still in the apartment, but I knew he had understood too. Now there was a silence between us, not tense, but accepting. I sent Noel a short message. I thanked him for helping me see myself, for his honesty that had brought me back to life, but I asked for time. "You deserve to be with someone who knows what they want," I wrote. His reply was simple: "I will wait." I signed up for a pottery class, deciding it was time to try something new, something that would help me express myself. The studio smelled of clay, and for the first time in a long time, my hands were working with something real, something tangible. I created my first pieces, crooked and imperfect, but there was something alive in those imperfections. Gradually, my life began to take shape, like clay on a potter's wheel. It was still uncertain, far from perfect, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. One day, sitting in the studio, I caught myself thinking. For the first time in ages, I wasn't seeking answers from others. They had always been inside me. I just hadn't dared to hear them. Now I was ready, and that was the beginning of a new life.